Hey, what is going on? Of course, it is me, your favorite plus size book slut, of course. Nostalgia allure. All my extraness aside, welcome back once again to Book Shade. Yes, darling. Okay. And the focus and the mission of Book Shade is to talk about a little more in regards to diversity, in regards to the romance genre, and specifically I'm only going to be focusing on ebooks, as well as I do talk about web comics, and we always enjoy that BookTube drama, okay? So for today's very special episode, because normally I usually do my show and I'm on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, but it's more towards the evening time. But there'll be times where I'll just do something like this more impromptu. But guys, let me tell you, I did some amazing research today. You will not believe what I found out, actually. So for this segment, this is my first ever BookTube news, where I'm going to be giving you all the tea about trends and interesting topics revolving around the culture known as, and the community known as BookTube. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about a genre of literature that I have to say it can be kind of controversial. And what I'm going to be talking about today is what exactly is the new adult genre, and also kind of tying it in with what makes adults really interested in the new adult genre, as well as how that relates to YA, which stands for young adult, and then the spin-off of that, which is called young adult crossover. I'll be giving examples and everything. So guys, what I decided to do is I decided to do some really in-depth research about what new adult is and the current state of it. Okay, so let's go over the definitions today. So, well, first the definitions, and then how it pretty much started. Okay, so let's start with that. So new adult, guys, the term actually appeared in around 2009. Okay, and what happened was St. Martin's Press decided to hold this contest. Pretty much they were asking for novel submissions that would be entered to be able to appeal or show what is called this new category called the new adult reading category. Okay, so here's the thing, guys, that's very interesting with a new adult as a genre, as a literary genre, is that it's not actually a literary genre. Well, you're like, wait, Nostalgia, like you just told me that it's a genre of literature. Actually, it depends on what context you look at, okay? Because new adult, there's a couple different like foundations. So this is the first one, that it started in 2009 because of St. Martin's Press contest. But then upon further research, some people believe that it actually started to kind of pick up more traction around 2012, okay? And this is when the concept of new adult was more concentrated in the independent publishing scene. Okay, so there's like two different stories here. So you got the Martin's Press story in 2009, and then you have the gaining traction of the term even further in 2012. Okay, so what started to happen, guys, in 2012 is that new adult novels started to appear on best-selling lists, and new adult books at this time were actually getting picked up by traditional publishing houses. Okay, that's what they're called, our publishing houses. So Here's the thing, guys, about new adult that I think there's a lot of misconception with. The thing that makes new adult as a literary genre problematic is if you look at it from the mainstream standpoint, if you go to like any mainstream bookstore, they will not have new adult as a separate category. What tends to happen sometimes, and how I can reinforce this, guys, is what I did today is I actually did a little bit further in-depth research where I actually called around to different bookstores and asking them if they had a new adult section. And you know what surprised me, guys, is I did a mixture. I called some independent bookstores, as they're called, and then I also called some mainstream or, you know, well-respected bookstores. And what I found is that mainstream bookstores, they actually quantify new adult. It's kind of merged in with YA. So that's what makes this particular genre really confusing, is that a lot of times when you're thinking you're reading just standard YA, you're actually not. You're actually could possibly, depending on the subject matter, reading new adult and not even know it, okay? So to really kind of clarify it even more, new adult, guys, is categorized of having characters that are featured between ages, I would say 18 to about like 27 years old. But here's the thing, guys, that makes new adult even more complex is that depending on the publisher, new adult would even expand even into people that are in their early to mid 30s. Because if you think about this time in life, guys, let's really break it down here, okay? So YA is kind of like the beginning of your life, right? This is when you're just kind of understanding what education is. You're starting to get into like cliques per se, not too heavy with the cliques, but you're trying to kind of find where you relate. And it's on a very basic level, okay? That's what YA is to me. So that's why I find YA really interesting as a genre of literature, because YA is not designed for adults in general. It's not. I've had a chance to read some YA books to kind of help to reinforce what we're talking about today. And I was really kind of perplexed because a lot of the YA is really watered down. So that's the next question we're going to be answering a little bit later, is like, why would adults really be interested in YA? What is so compelling about it? So new adult, guys, and this is where a lot of the criticism comes with new adult, is some people believe that new adult is just an enhancement of YA, but it's not. Because if you think about the development of someone's life, you have, like I said, YA, which is that beginning formation. You're just kind of getting into education and you're getting more familiarized with language and terminologies and things like that. But what new adult represents is this middle portion of your life that you are transitioning into becoming a full-blown adult. And that's the difference. Your college is pretty much college life. That's what new adult represents. But what makes it confusing, guys, and here's a couple of examples, and I'll go back into my research that I did by contacting different like bookstores to find out if they actually had a new adult section or was it lumped with YA. So what made new adult, guys, really confusing is this particular book, Twilight. Okay, now Twilight is categorized as YA, as young adult. But what makes Twilight, guys, really interesting is, to me, technically, Twilight should be a YA crossover and potentially could go a little bit into new adult. It's not because, okay, so Twilight does not take place in college, but it's the attitudes and the mannerisms of Twilight and how the characters act, especially if you watch the movies. they are way more mature than someone that would like a protagonist that would be categorized in the general YA category. So Twilight's really what kind of helped to start this, in my opinion, from a mainstream standpoint, is because some people were confused with Twilight. Some people are like, oh, this is a book that's clearly YA. It's not for me as an adult. But when you actually start to read Twilight, guys, there's a maturity level that you have to be at for you to really resonate with some parts of the story, especially with the other books in the series like Eclipse and New Moon and Breaking Dawn. I mean, it's very mature. When you watch the movies, it's very mature in certain elements. So I've kind of been rethinking if Twilight is really, should it really be categorized as YA? And I say no, because I know tons of adults that are reading Twilight, and it's technically not designed for them, but we'll get into marketing later on. Okay, so getting back into my research here. So the first place that I called was a independent bookstore, and when I asked if they had a new adult section, the person actually said that they do. Like, you can actually go to this particular bookstore and they have a new adult section, and then they also have a separate section for YA. Then I did ask the person I was talking to if it was popular or not, and it seemed that YA, according to them, was more popular than new adult, but there were still people who were getting new adult books. Okay, then the second place I called was a used bookstore, and it was more like mainstream. So when I called them, they were a little more informative. And what I found really interesting is in this particular used bookstore, they don't have a new adult section, because once again, technically new adult is not considered a subgenre. Like, it's not a full-blown main genre. And then when I talked to the second person, they said that they usually kind of lump together new adult with what they call like older YA. So it's older young adult. So that's how they kind of lump it together. So I found that really interesting too. And then I asked a second question of, why do you think that adults would be interested in YA? Because to me, YA seems a little, depending on the story, but like, it seems a little more watered down and primitive. So I'm kind of thinking like, well, if you're an adult, you're going to have a much more advanced way of thinking and reflecting on things that is sometimes problematic within YA. Because sometimes there's so much drama in the YA category that, to me, it's kind of hard for me to relate to it. And then the last person I talked to, I decided to talk to a more well-recognizable bookstore, a little bit bigger. This person was really knowledgeable on YA. Like, they really knew a lot. So it was very informative for me to find something out too, which also surprised me. So I asked the same question of, why do you think adults would be interested in YA? And what they mentioned to me is that YA has a sense, like, depending on the story, for some adults, it has this reflective nostalgia. So it seems like people want to go back to how things used to be for them, and that seeing that transition of going into young adulthood and just kind of reconnecting with that and feeling those emotions and the stories for crossover. I think crossover YA is a little more appropriate for adults because it has a little more maturity to the storyline. So maybe that's why, to me, that's why I thought of the reason why a lot of adults like the YA genre. I think it's just because of that correlation of, like, you're seeing the building blocks of how a person matures. So I never thought of it as like nostalgia. So I thought that was a really interesting perspective. And then the person that I talked to also kind of exemplified some of the different subgenres within YA too. So that really kind of helped me to clarify kind of what I'm talking about today. So after I did that research, I decided to go a little bit deeper and really kind of break down what are the key components of what is quantifiable as a new adult. So I mentioned earlier that new adult, or sometimes it's called NA fiction, but they call it new adult fiction. But new adult is the more shortened version of it, okay? So what new adult is designed for, and this is coming from Wikipedia actually, is that the protagonists in NA fiction, they're usually between the 18 to 30 kind of age bracket. So once again, it's right in that, I like to call it the transitional adulthood. So you're just getting, you're getting into college and you're dealing with issues like your first college love. You're dealing with how you identify, like Wikipedia describes it as like developing your sexuality. You're dealing with, leaving home for the first time and all these new emotions. So that's pretty much college. If you have gone to college, you can relate to that experience of, you're trying to figure out what are the things that really make me who I am. So those are some of the topics. Sometimes it even goes deeper. Some NA books talk about things like mental health. Some talk about things that revolve around questioning your career choices. So all of these things kind of attribute into what is called personal development. Okay, so some examples in the genre, and I'll show you here. So remember, I was talking about how Twilight is really what kind of got people on a mainstream point too. There were books before this, but it was Twilight that really kind of started this, like, is it YA or is it NA? Okay, so then the other book that also kind of helped to push this a little bit more, but this book is considered adult romance, but some people would also categorize it a little bit on the heavier side of the spectrum of NA as well. So with 50 Shades of Grey, what is really confusing is you have some elements of NA, but it's adult romance. So here's the confusing thing too, guys, about new adult, or NA for short. NA actually, guys, is a romance genre. It's actually a subgenre off of the general romance genre. But what happened is in 2012 and then onward, because NA, guys, has actually been around for about 10 years now, probably even more than that. So then what started to happen, this is just from my research, it started to branch off into its own separate, like, subgenre. So you still have the romantic subgenre definition of new adult, but then because of 50 Shades of Grey, you kind of get half and half, because you still have the NA where it's the transitional period, because Anastasia is kind of, is pretty much in her probably like her early 20s, and she's still trying to figure out. She's like, okay, well, what do I want to do with my life? And then she meets Christian Grey, and then she has to kind of mature into being more adult romance because of the subject matter. As you know, 50 Shades of Grey deals with things such as identity crisis, a more mature form of it. But you won't learn that until later on in the trilogy with like 50 Shades Darker. That's where you start to see a little more of the complexness, or the complexity. There we go. The complexity of Anastasia's character. 50 Shades of Grey is really like a foundation, but as you read the story, you come to see that Anastasia has to goes more into the realm of adult romance, because Christian Grey is much older than her, but then he has this matureness, because you'll learn that because of his background, you know, throughout the trilogy. So 50 Shades of Grey also was kind of problematic too, because it's still categorized by the mainstream as being adult romance because of the subject matter, but if you really break down 50 Shades of Grey, it's just an upgrade from Twilight. So that's the difference. It's pretty much the retelling of Twilight, but it's on a much more mature scale. But there's still some elements, if you water it down, it's still some elements of NA in there. And another thing to note too, guys, is that marketing really plays a role in what causes a lot of the drama that can occur with the complexities of main literary genres and subgenres. Because what have we learned so far? NA was first started as part of a contest, but then it expanded into its own separate entity, but it's not seen by mainstream publishers as a like romance or like suspense or sci-fi. It's not seen as its own genre. But then on the independent side, there is a new adult culture, but from the mainstream side, there's not. There was kind of like a hype for it, like as of course I mentioned in 2012, but then it kind of died off, and it just kind of got homogenized. And I honestly feel that YA crossover is pretty much like a step down from NA. But do you see how confusing and why some people, I can understand the criticisms of new adult, because new adult sometimes too gets lumped with YA, but to me they are two separate things, because the experiences of the characters, it's really day and night. But then there are stories like 50 Shades of Grey or Twilight where you're getting a mixture of everything, and it's just really crazy. So I think that's what is kind of problematic with the NA genre, is that unfortunately because of marketing, and this, guys, we'll learn this too, especially in regards to the romance genre, marketing is really confusing. Especially like, for example, with the interracial or multicultural romances, if it's not marketed correctly to the right audience that will resonate with it, it gets canceled really quickly. And unfortunately, that's why romance is not as heavily weighted in BookTube. And it's starting to, but it's still a small entity, because the majority of the reading that I see in BookTube is primarily YA and YA crossover. There is a little bit of NA, but let's get into the criticisms of NA, and I'll show you some more examples here. So some more examples of NA include the one that I mentioned before, which is called it's actually called multicultural NA, but this is a new emerging genre. It's still very small. But it's a subgenre. So if you think about romance, right, you have the generalized romance genre, and then underneath that you have historical, you have, like, let's say science fiction, and then you have this, which is the multicultural and interracial. So underneath that you have this, which is the interracial multicultural new adult genre. So examples of this is Sugar Love by Victoria M. Smith. There's also The Boyfriend, which I've heard is really, really good. Look at that body. Yes, boy. Okay, lickable. Ah! No, I'm being a mess. But you have The Boyfriend by Mika Jolie. So it's just that right in between, you know. And then I'll show you guys some of the stuff that I am currently reading too, but I'll be a little bit later on. But those are just some examples. And then here's the thing, guys, with NA too, there are subgenres within this like subgenre. So it really, guys, some of the conclusions, it really depends on who you talk to, because some people treat NA as a main genre like they would with romance or mystery or etc., etc. Other people think it's a branch off of YA, but you can't, to me, you really can't say that, because NA, the whole purpose of it is for people that are just college age people, or people that are a little bit older into like maybe the second half of adulthood. So the problem is when people cancel NA, what happens is you go from NA and then you just jump to adult romance. Okay, adult romance is meant to be raunchier. It's a lot more uncensored, and that's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, you know? So you need to have this. I personally believe that the romantic genre, like any other genre, should be respected as a spectrum, okay? So you have the YA crossover romance genre or subgenre. So you have those stories kind of like Twilight, that kind of stuff. And then right in the middle of that, you could have, once again, like The Boyfriend or Sugar Love, where it's right, you're just starting college and, you have these new emotions of how romance feels. It's like maybe your first serious, really deep, complex relationship. So I think you do need to have this middle ground. I think it's very important, okay? So let's get into a little bit further of the criticisms of YA, okay? So I was reading one article and it described it very well, that the thing that's problematic with new adult being considered as YA is that there is a difference in maturity level. A lot of YA, it's very light and very fluffy and prim and proper kind of romance. But when you get into YA, this is where there's more experimentation. So that's my reason of why I think NA gets one of the reasons why I think NA gets criticized heavily is because it's kind of like the unknown kind of territory. Because I think in regards to YA, I think people are used to this prim and proper and kind of really clean like type of storytelling, whereas NA starts to make you challenge things. And for some people, that's something that's very uncomfortable. And I think that's why at that time, that's why there was a lot of criticism. And then secondly, people didn't know like what to do with the category, because it is still, even though it's like around 10 years old, but it's still new. And then the other thing I think that's going to be a problem with NA in the future is, do you still treat it as a romance subgenre, or is it its own separate entity? And that's some of the other criticisms too with the NA crossover, is some people just call it, it's a step up in regards to the maturity of the level of romance in it. But I don't think that's kind of true sometimes, because yes, it is contingent on the story. But for me personally, from my research, I think NA crossover it's kind of half and half. So if you really look, so let's break down this spectrum, right? So we have in regards to romance, and this could apply to other genres too. So you have NA, which is like the beginning of your life in a way. It's kind of like the second level of the beginning of your life. And then right in between that, that's like the middle part of your life, which is the YA crossover. And then once you kind of, finish going through that phase, then you're starting college, and then you have NA, which is new adult. And then once you kind of finish college and you're getting your first job, that kind of thing, now you're transitioning into adult romance, or I like to call it mature romance. But there's different spectrums within that. So I think that to me is my spectrum of what I would think is true. And I think that's why people criticize the NA genre, is because there's no place for it. And I think when it comes to BookTube and how sometimes people perceive the whole YA versus NA thing, I think people just kind of expect the spectrum to just be, you know, here and there, because that's how, to me, some of the, like, the publishing like I would say the publishing companies, some of them, that's how they market it. Because right now, guys, even though romance is still a highly profitable and very successful genre, YA came out of fucking nowhere and it took over. Okay, so I think because people don't think sometimes maybe that NA is a spectrum, just like how YA can be, and like the adult romance category can be. I think that's the reason why NA has the problems that it has. Is that some people just think it's a much more upgrade from YA, but you cannot treat NA like standard YA. You cannot. So that's just my views on it, but you guys also let me know what you think about that as well. So to conclude, guys, today's episode, I'm going to be sharing with you what I am currently going to be reading and reviewing in the future for you guys, okay? So, I love this cover. Oh, so sexy. Yes, go on. All right, and then yes. Okay, no, I'm being extra here. Okay, so this is what I'm currently reading. The first one here is part of it's like a vampire series. There's like a couple of books. I think there's actually over like 20 books. This is an author that gets mixed reviews in the romance BookTube community. Her name is Lindsay Sands. Very well respected by some. Other people say that, her writing is just, it's not to the level. But see, here's the thing. When it comes to literature, it's a very interpersonal thing. So what I resonate with, you may not care for. So I'm starting off with the first book in this vampire series that she has, and it's called A Quick Bite. So I'm going to start that actually today. And then the second one that I've started already is Harley Merlin. I practiced that so many times and I still fucked it up. So it's Harley Merlin, and this is the first book in the series. This is by Bella Forrest, and I wanted to see what the big deal is, because some people say that this particular series is like an alternative replacement to Harry Potter. Okay, we'll see about it, but she's a very Bella Forrest, guys. This series has sold over 7 million copies, probably even more than that. So it must be decent, right? So we'll see. But so far, I'm on chapter 2, so I can't really say, if it's wonderful or not. But it's off to a good start. I've heard that this series is kind of problematic as you go further along, but this is what I would consider more of like it's classified as YA, but to me personally, this is more of a YA crossover. So I'll see if I don't like this series, I'll probably cancel YA and move on to just strictly reviewing NA. But we'll see. Maybe it'll surprise me. We'll see. All right, and then the final thing that I'm going to start reading too is, I think, one particular subgenre in the romance genre that gets greatly overlooked here on BookTube, in my opinion, but it's starting to emerge, is the LGBTQIA romance subgenre within the general romance. And I wanted to read this because it had decent reviews. This is a 2-part book series that are standalone novels. And it's done, they're standalones, but they're still kind of together, if you know what I mean. It's done by Casey Luck, and this is called the Lesbian Billionaires Club. I think it was just the name that it compelled me to get this shit. So, yeah, I really want to support, because as an ally to the LGBTQIA community, I feel that these romance stories are not always talked about, and they're greatly kind of overlooked sometimes on BookTube, in my opinion. But I'm starting to see an emergence of more people talking about this, so I think it's really good. But I just felt like, to me, love is love, so I'm going to read all different love relationships, because I felt like that would be fair. It would be fair for me to do that, so that I can see like how you know, how a story written for a same-sex couple, maybe there are differences than a heterosexual couple. So yeah, that's what I'm currently going to be reading. And guys, I even got more books. Okay, I love ebooks, man. Ebooks, these are, and all three of these are this one is a main book series, but I got the digital version of it. And then this one I got it's a regular physical book, and I got the digital version of that. And then this one is an ebook. So yeah, I'm gonna have a lot of fun with this. I think I'm really gonna enjoy it. So yeah, you guys let me know what you think about what we talked about today, and you guys tell me as adults, why do you think that why do you read YA as an adult? Do you think it's primitive like what I said? And do you think that adults like older adults should be reading more of NA? But you guys let me know what you think about the new adult and that whole battle between YA versus NA. So yeah, definitely let me know, guys, of course, in that vicious comment section below.